Scott Hassinger stood on the edge of the diving board, his heart pounding. This was it, his big moment. The culmination of years of training, of early mornings spent slicing through the water like a blade, of aching muscles and unwavering discipline. His mother had been his biggest supporter, but after her passing, it was Margaret, his stepmother and his mother's best friend, who had taken up the mantle. She was in the stands now, watching with a mix of pride and nervous energy. Scott took a deep breath, arms raised, toes curled around the board. He launched into his routine, twisting, turning, slicing through the air. Then, something went wrong. A miscalculation. A fraction of a second too late. His body hit the water at a devastating angle and everything snapped to black. When Scott woke, he wasn't in the pool. He wasn't anywhere familiar. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the low hum of machines, the blinding whiteness of hospital walls, it all came at him in fragments. He tried to move. Nothing happened. Margaret sat beside him, clutching his hand. Her grip was tight, almost too tight. "Scott," she said softly, her voice catching. He blinked. His throat was dry. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse breath escaped. Margaret turned to the doctor standing beside her. The doctor's expression was one of well-practiced sympathy, a mask of gentle regret. "Scott," the doctor said, "I'm so sorry. You've suffered a severe spinal injury. The damage is irreversible. You're paralyzed from the neck down." Scott felt the words before he processed them, like a physical weight, pressing him into the bed. He stared at Margaret, searching for some sign that this wasn't real, that this was some terrible, fevered dream. But there was only the truth in her tired, watery eyes. The days blurred together in the hospital. Nurses attended to him, feeding him, moving him, turning him in bed so he wouldn't develop sores. Margaret was always there, making quiet phone calls, talking to doctors, arranging things. When the hospital finally discharged him, it wasn't because he was ready. It was because there was no insurance to cover his extended stay. Margaret handled it all. She packed up his things, spoke with the nurses, arranged for transport. When the time came, 2 orderlies carried him to the minivan she had borrowed. One of them waited inside while Margaret had one last conversation with the doctor. "He's going to need a lot of care," the doctor said, handing her a long list. "Feeding supplies, bibs, blankets, something crib-like so he doesn't fall out of bed, special feeding bottles, and last but not least, adult briefs." Margaret frowned. "What are those?" The doctor gave her a patient look. "Diapers." Margaret exhaled sharply, taking the list and heading back to the van. She loaded everything inside and got behind the wheel. The drive home was long and quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, she said, "I'm really glad you're coming home, Scott. We have a lot to catch up on. It's going to be an adjustment, but we'll figure it out." Scott said nothing. He wanted to scream, to argue, to demand something, anything. But what was there to say? He was trapped. A mind still sharp, still vibrant, locked inside a body that no longer obeyed. By the time they arrived at Margaret's house, the sun was setting, casting long golden streaks across the walls. She wheeled him inside, guiding his electric chair carefully over the threshold. The house smelled warm, like lavender, and something baked earlier in the day. Then, the smell shifted. Something sour, something wrong. Scott felt his stomach drop. He knew immediately what had happened, and shame burned hot in his cheeks. Margaret sniffed the air, then turned to him. Understanding dawned in her expression, and she knelt beside him, touching his arm gently. "It's okay, Scott, it's not your fault." He wanted to disappear. He wanted to be anywhere but here, in this humiliating, inescapable moment. Margaret left the room for a moment and returned with the supplies, her expression patient, unfazed. "We'll take care of it," she said, her voice steady. He closed his eyes as she went through the motions, feeling like a helpless child. When she was done, she rolled him to the table and set a bowl of minestrone soup in front of him. "Let's eat," she said, lifting a spoonful to his lips. "Tomorrow we'll start physical therapy." Tonight, I picked out a movie for us. Something light, something good. Scott swallowed, his pride sitting heavy in his throat. He wasn't sure if he could handle tomorrow or the next day or the one after that. But for tonight, at least, he let himself be fed. For tonight, he let himself believe in Margaret's promise that things would get better. The next day, Margaret wheeled Scott into the physical therapy center. The bright fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow on the polished floor. Scott's eyes darted around, taking in the other patients. Some were learning to walk again. Others, like him, sat still, waiting for something to change. His therapist, a man named Daniel, greeted them with a practiced smile. "Welcome, Scott. We're going to take this one step at a time." Scott scoffed internally. Steps were something he no longer had. Daniel began the session with simple range of motion exercises, moving Scott's arms for him, manipulating his legs. It was both painful and humiliating, being treated like a doll. Margaret sat nearby, watching with quiet intensity, but not interfering. Later, when they returned home, Margaret helped him change, the routine now becoming familiar. He wanted to protest, to regain some shred of dignity, but the truth was, he needed her, and she never hesitated. That night, Margaret set up a movie. It was an old favorite, something from his childhood, nostalgia wrapped around him, comforting but bittersweet. As the film played, Margaret leaned over. "You know, Scott, you're stronger than you think." Scott didn't answer. He wasn't sure he believed her. But as the days stretched into weeks, a quiet determination settled inside him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't done yet. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Mommy Sarah's Story Time. If you enjoyed the stories, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Remember, my channel is not monetized, and I write most of the content myself. On occasions when I don't, it's sourced through emails from trusted contacts. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you're able to, consider making a donation to support our channel. Your support means a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you.